I stood in my hallway wearing freshly pressed work clothes while two police officers waited outside my front door. One of them kept his hand resting lightly on his belt. Calm, professional, careful. Behind me, my husband Daniel stood silently near the kitchen entrance, watching everything without saying a word. The older officer cleared his throat first. "Ma'am, we received a report regarding a possible property dispute." For a second, I honestly thought they had the wrong address. "A property dispute?" I repeated. The officer nodded once and glanced down at the small notebook in his hand. "Your father claims he has financial ownership tied to this residence, and says he is being denied access." My stomach tightened immediately. Of course he did. Not because he cared about the house. Not because he needed anything inside it. And definitely not because this was about family. This was about control. It had always been about control. The moment I finally stopped giving him what he wanted, he escalated. Daniel stepped a little closer behind me, steady and quiet like always. He did not interrupt. He did not panic. He simply stayed there beside me, reminding me I was no longer facing these moments alone. I looked back at the officers. "I can prove this house belongs to me," I said calmly. The younger officer nodded politely. "That's all we're here to determine." Funny how strangers sometimes speak to you with more respect than your own family ever does. As I reached for the folder containing every payment record and legal document, one thought kept repeating in my head. My father really called the police because I refused to pay for my sister's wedding. But the truth is, this story did not begin with the police standing on my porch. It started weeks earlier on a bright Texas morning that should have been one of the proudest days of my life. The Texas sun was already brutal by 8 in the morning. Heat rose from the pavement around the parade field while rows of families slowly filled the bleachers. Everywhere I looked, people were smiling, waving signs, fixing cameras, calling out names across the crowd. Some parents looked nervous. Others looked proud enough to burst. I stood perfectly still in formation with my shoulders squared and my chin lifted, but inside I kept counting rows. Left section. Third row. That was where my family was supposed to be sitting. I knew because I mailed the tickets myself 3 weeks earlier. I even included a parking map after my father complained that the base would probably be too confusing. The last time we spoke before graduation, he sounded distracted. Yeah, we'll be there," he said impatiently. "Stop worrying about it." So I tried to believe him. But as the ceremony began and the crowd settled into their seats, those chairs stayed empty. I told myself maybe they were late. Traffic. Construction. A misturn somewhere outside the gate. Anything but the truth sitting quietly in my chest. Around me, emotion spilled everywhere. One soldier near me laughed under his breath when he spotted his little brother holding a giant handmade sign. Another wiped his eyes quickly after hearing his mother scream his name from the stands. A girl 2 rows ahead whispered, "They actually came." Like she still could not believe it herself. I kept my eyes forward. Military training teaches you how to stay composed under pressure. It does not teach you how to ignore disappointment. The speeches blurred together after a while. Honor. Sacrifice. Commitment. Words that meant something to me. Words I had earned. Yet every round of applause reminded me who was missing. When the ceremony finally ended, families rushed toward the field immediately. Laughter echoed everywhere while cameras flashed non-stop in the bright sunlight. I stayed where I was for a few extra seconds, just in case. Maybe they were still coming. Maybe my father would suddenly appear pretending nothing happened. But the crowd kept thinning, and the empty feeling inside me grew heavier. Rachel. I turned slightly. A small woman with warm brown eyes stood nearby holding a folded program against her chest. It was Mrs. Miller, the mother of another graduate from my unit. "You're alone?" she asked softly. I gave a quick nod. For 1 second, sadness crossed her face. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me before I could react. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. 3 simple words. That was all it took to nearly break me. I swallowed hard and looked away quickly before my emotions showed on my face. Her son Tyler grinned beside her and nudged my shoulder. "Told my mom she'd probably adopt you today," he joked. I laughed quietly for the first time all morning. Later, after the field emptied and the sun started dropping lower in the sky, I sat alone on the metal bleachers and checked my phone. No missed calls. No epaleyi. No explanation. Just silence. Growing up, I learned very early that my sister Olivia and I lived by different rules. She was the easy child. That was the phrase my father loved using whenever people talked about us. Olivia smiled at the right moments, stayed close to home, and rarely challenged anyone. Teachers adored her. Relatives spoiled her. My father treated every small accomplishment like a major event. Meanwhile, I always felt like I was being evaluated. If I brought home good grades, the response was usually, "That's what you're supposed to do." If I worked extra hours after school, my father would say, "Good. Maybe now you'll understand responsibility." Nothing ever seemed enough to fully earn approval. By 16, I was balancing classes with 2 part-time jobs. Most of my paycheck went into an old metal cash box hidden inside my closet. I spent nearly 2 years saving for a used car so I could stop borrowing rides from friends. Then Olivia got accepted into an expensive leadership program in Colorado. One night, my father walked into my room holding a stack of unpaid bills. "Your sister deserves this opportunity," he told me. "Family helps family." He promised he would repay every dollar he borrowed from my savings. He never did. At the time, I convinced myself it was temporary, that eventually things would become balanced between us. But the pattern only repeated itself. When I started military training, I sent money home whenever I could spare it. Sometimes it was $200. Sometimes more. Not once did my father thank me. A few weeks later, another request would always appear. Bills. Repairs. Emergency expenses. There was always a reason. And somehow, I always felt responsible for fixing it. Looking back now, I realize something painful. I spent most of my life trying to earn love that should have been given freely. That changes a person. You stop asking whether something is fair. You stop recognizing your own exhaustion. You become useful instead of valued. Everything shifted the year I met Daniel. He was nothing like the chaos I grew up around. Quiet. Reliable. Patient. The kind of man who listened carefully before speaking. He never made me feel like affection had to be earned through sacrifice. For the first time in my life, home felt calm instead of unpredictable. And honestly, that scared me at first. Because when someone spends years surviving emotional pressure, peace can feel unfamiliar. But slowly, Daniel taught me something I had never truly experienced before. Real love does not keep score. A few weeks after graduation, life finally started feeling steady. Daniel and I settled into a comfortable routine inside our small Texas home. Mornings were quiet. Evenings were simple. After years of emotional tension, peace still felt strange to me sometimes, but I was learning not to question it. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was making coffee in the kitchen. I glanced down casually, expecting a delivery notification or maybe a message from work. Instead, I saw my father's name. My stomach tightened immediately. I opened the message. "I need $8,000 for Olivia's wedding." That was it. No congratulations for graduating. No apology for missing the ceremony. No "how are you?" Just a demand. I stared at the screen while the coffee machine hummed quietly beside me. For a moment, an old instinct kicked in automatically. My brain immediately started calculating numbers. Could I technically afford it? Would helping make things easier? Would this finally repair something between us? Daniel walked into the kitchen carrying a stack of mail and noticed my expression almost instantly. "You okay?" he asked. Without answering, I handed him my phone. He read the message slowly, then looked back at me with disbelief written all over his face. "Wow," he muttered quietly. I leaned against the counter and folded my arms tightly. "He hasn't spoken to me since graduation," I said. Daniel shook his head once. "And the first thing he says is this?" I gave a dry laugh without humor. Sounds about right. What I appreciated most about Daniel was that he never pressured me emotionally. He never told me what I should do. He simply asked questions that forced me to be honest with myself. After a moment, he looked at me carefully. "Do you actually want to help?" The question caught me off guard. Not because it was complicated, because nobody had ever asked me that before. Growing up, helping was never a choice. It was expected. I looked down at the message again. $8,000. Not a conversation. Not a request filled with humility, an expectation. And suddenly all I could picture were those empty seats at graduation. That silence. That disappointment. I opened the reply box slowly. At first I considered typing something emotional, a long explanation about years of hurt and neglect. But I already knew it would change nothing. So instead I typed one simple sentence. $8 sent. Best wishes. Then I hit send. The phone started ringing early the next morning. I was sitting at the edge of the bed tying my boots when my father's name flashed across the screen for the third time in less than 2 minutes. I ignored the first 2 calls. By the fourth I answered. I did not say hello. Neither did he. What the hell is wrong with you? He exploded immediately. His voice came through the speaker loud enough to fill the room. $8? Are you trying to embarrass this family? I finished tightening my boot calmly before responding. You asked for money, I said evenly. I sent what I was willing to give. There was a sharp silence. Then his anger came back even harder. Don't play games with me, Rachel. Your sister's wedding is important. I stood and walked slowly toward the window. My graduation was important too, I replied. He ignored that completely. You have money, he snapped. You've got a house, a military paycheck, stability. Meanwhile, your own family needs help. The familiar guilt started pushing at me like an old bruise. For years, that tone alone would have been enough to make me apologize. Not anymore. I've helped plenty before, I said. Oh please, he scoffed. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? I closed my eyes for a second. There it was again. That sentence. The one he used anytime control started slipping away. What exactly did you do for me? I asked quietly. His breathing grew heavier. I helped you buy that house. The statement almost made me laugh. Years earlier, he contributed a small amount toward the down payment during a period when he was trying unusually hard to act supportive. I paid every dollar back within a year. But somehow, in his version of history, temporary help became permanent ownership. I repaid you, I reminded him calmly. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. You're unbelievable, he snapped. Ever since you joined the military, you think you're better than everybody. I leaned against the wall and lowered my voice even further. No, I said. I just learned what respect looks like. That hit him harder than yelling ever could. For a moment, the line went completely silent. Then his tone shifted colder. You don't get to shut your family out. I looked toward the hallway where Daniel was quietly moving around the kitchen. I'm not shutting anyone out, I replied. I'm setting boundaries. You changed, he muttered bitterly. Maybe I had. Or maybe I finally stopped accepting things I should have questioned years ago. Then came the threat. That house has my money in it, he said sharply. You can't lock us out forever. I straightened immediately. You're not coming into my house uninvited, I said firmly. Another pause. Then his voice dropped lower. You're going to regret this. For the first time in my life, those words did not scare me. You taught me how to survive without you, I answered quietly. The line went dead seconds later. I stared at my phone for a long moment before walking into the kitchen. Daniel looked up from the counter. How bad? I exhaled slowly. Can you change the locks today? He nodded immediately without asking another question. And somehow that simple response healed something inside me. Because healthy people do not argue with your boundaries. They help you protect them. The knock came 2 days later. 3 hard pounds against the front door. Not casual. Not friendly. Official. Daniel looked up from the living room couch immediately. You expecting someone? He asked. I shook my head slowly. Another knock echoed through the house, louder this time. Something cold settled in my stomach as I walked toward the door. Deep down, I already knew this had something to do with my father. I opened it carefully. 2 police officers stood on the porch under the afternoon sun. One older, one younger, both calm and professional. Ma'am, the older officer said politely. We received a report regarding a possible property dispute. There it was. My father actually called the police. For one brief second, embarrassment washed over me. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because some part of me still hated seeing private family problems become public. Behind me, I heard Daniel stand up quietly. The younger officer glanced down at a small notepad. Your father claims he contributed financially to this property and is being denied access to belongings inside. I almost laughed from disbelief. Not because it was funny, because it was so predictable. Control had always been my father's favorite weapon. When guilt stopped working, he escalated. I stepped aside slightly but did not invite them in. I can clear this up, I said calmly. I walked to the hallway cabinet and pulled out a neatly organized folder containing every important document tied to the house. Mortgage paperwork, payment history, bank transfers, even the repayment record showing I returned the money my father once contributed years earlier. The older officer reviewed everything carefully, while the younger one remained near the doorway. The silence felt strangely peaceful. No yelling. No manipulation. Just facts. Finally, the older officer handed the folder back to me. Ma'am, based on these documents, this property belongs solely to you. I nodded once. I understand, I said quietly. He hesitated briefly before continuing. If your father attempts to enter the property without permission, you have the right to contact us. Immediately. Daniel crossed his arms beside me. So there's no ownership dispute? He asked. The officer shook his head. Not from what we can see. For a moment nobody spoke. Then the younger officer offered a small sympathetic smile. Unfortunately, he said carefully, situations like this happen more often than people think. That sentence stayed with me after they left. 'Cause he was right. Families break apart quietly every day over control disguised as love. I closed the front door gently once the officers walked back to their car. No tears came. No panic either. Only clarity. I finally understood something that had taken me years to accept. People who benefit from your silence rarely react well when you start saying no. And sometimes the moment you protect your peace is the exact moment they reveal who they really are. My phone buzzed later that evening while Daniel and I were eating dinner. I already knew who it was before checking the screen. Olivia. For a moment I considered ignoring it completely. Instead I opened the message. Dad's really upset right now. I stared at the words quietly. Not are you okay? Not I heard the police showed up. Not even what happened. Just concern for him. A second message appeared almost immediately. I don't understand why you're doing this. I leaned back slowly in my chair and set the phone beside my plate. Daniel watched my face carefully. Your sister? He asked. I nodded once. He did not ask to read the messages. He already understood enough. Part of me wanted to defend myself immediately. Years of habit still lived inside me somewhere. That old instinct to explain everything clearly enough that people would finally understand my side. But experience had taught me something difficult. People only misunderstand boundaries when those boundaries inconvenience them. Another message arrived. This wedding means everything to me. That one hurt more than I expected. Because despite everything, I loved my sister. Not in the loud emotional way movies usually show family love. Ours was quieter and more complicated than that. Olivia grew up inside the same house I did. The difference was that the pressure never landed on her shoulders. For years, I protected her from reality she barely noticed. And somehow, I became the villain the moment I stopped carrying everybody else. I picked up my phone again and read through the messages one more time. Then I typed slowly. I hope your wedding is everything you want it to be. Simple. Honest. No anger hidden between the lines. A few seconds later she responded. That's it. I looked at the screen for a long moment before locking my phone and setting it face down on the table. Yes, that was it. For the first time in my life, I was no longer begging people to understand boundaries they never wanted me to have in the first place. That night, after dinner dishes were cleaned and the house grew quiet, I sat alone at the kitchen table with my laptop open in front of me. The screen glowed softly in the dark room while years of memories circled through my mind. Not dramatic memories. Not huge traumatic moments. Small things. Repeated things. The kind of moments people dismiss because each one seems insignificant by itself. Money borrowed and never returned. Phone calls that only came when someone needed something. Achievements ignored. Sacrifices expected. Slowly I started organizing everything into folders. Bank transfers. Old text messages. Payment confirmations. At first, I told myself I was preparing in case my father tried escalating again. But deep down I knew the truth. I needed proof for myself. Because when someone spends years minimizing your feelings, you eventually start questioning your own reality. As I looked through everything laid out clearly in front of me, one painful realization settled heavily inside my chest. I had tolerated far more than I ever admitted. Daniel walked quietly into the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He placed one beside me and glanced at the screen. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said. "I think I finally see things clearly." He rested his hand lightly against my shoulder before sitting nearby without interrupting my thoughts. For the next hour, I wrote something I should have written years earlier. Boundaries. Clear. Simple. Final. No more financial support. No.
Surprise visite.
No access to my home without permission. Communication only if respectful.
No insults. No threats. No manipulation.
When I finished, I read the message twice. It was not cruel. It was not emotional. That was important to me. I no longer wanted revenge. I wanted peace. Finally, I copied the message and sent it to both my father and Olivia. Then I closed the laptop. My chest felt strangely calm afterward. Not lighter exactly. More stable. Like I had finally stopped carrying something that was never mine to begin with. About 20 minutes later, my phone lit up again. "Olivia. I don't even recognize you anymore." I stared at the message quietly before setting the phone aside. Maybe she was right. Because the version of me they recognized was the version that accepted being used. And that version was finally gone. The wedding happened 2 weeks later. I was not there.
No dramatic confrontation.
No last-minute change of heart. Just distance. Honestly, the silence felt healthier than pretending everything was normal. A few days afterward, I received a message from a cousin I had not spoken to in years. "Thought you should know things got messy." That was how it started. Apparently several vendors had not been fully paid. There was arguing during the reception. My father lost his temper in front of guests. People noticed the tension immediately. I read the message once, then locked my phone. Surprisingly, I did not feel satisfaction. No victory.
No revenge.
Only confirmation. Because the real problem had never been me refusing to rescue everybody. The problem was a family system built around expectation instead of accountability. That evening, my father called again. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Instead, I stepped onto the back porch and answered quietly. "Hello." There was a long pause before he spoke. His voice sounded different this time. Less explosive. More tired. "We need to talk," he said. I leaned against the porch railing and stared out at the fading Texas sunset. "About what?" Another pause. "About everything." That vague answer told me immediately. He still did not fully understand the damage he caused. "You called the police on me," I said calmly. "I was trying to get your attention," he replied quickly. "That's not how healthy people communicate." Silence settled between us again. Finally, he exhaled heavily. "I needed help, Rachel." I closed my eyes briefly. "I've helped my entire life." "You're still part of this family," he said. The words landed differently now than they once would have. Because I finally understood something important. Being included only when you are useful is not love. "I was part of this family when I was giving something," I answered quietly. "That's not fair," he snapped immediately. "No," I agreed softly. "It isn't." The wind moved gently through the trees behind the house while neither of us spoke. Then he asked the question I think he had been avoiding the entire time. "So what now?" I thought carefully before answering. Not because I was uncertain, because I wanted my words to be honest. "I'm done abandoning myself just to keep everyone else comfortable." Another long silence followed. For years, silence around my father felt dangerous. Now it simply felt empty. "I don't hate you," I said finally. "But I'm not going back to the way things were." His breathing slowed on the other end of the line. For the first time in my life, I think he realized I meant it. "I should go," I said calmly. He started to respond, but I ended the call gently before he could. Not from anger. Not from bitterness. Just completion. Some conversations do not end with reconciliation. Sometimes they end with clarity, and honestly, that can be enough. Later that night, I sat alone in the living room while the house settled into silence around me. Daniel had already gone upstairs, and the only light came from the small lamp beside the couch. For some reason, I found myself opening the old graduation photo stored on my phone. I stared at it for a long time. There I was standing in uniform under the brutal Texas sun, smiling softly beside Mrs. Miller and her son Tyler.
No parents beside me.
No family celebration. No proud father shaking my hand. For a long time, that photo represented rejection in my mind. Proof that I was never important enough for people who should have shown up. But that night, I finally saw something different. I saw survival. Strength. A young woman who kept moving forward even while carrying disappointment most people never noticed. And somewhere along the way, I built something better than the approval I spent years chasing. I built peace. A healthy marriage. A stable home. A life where love was not treated like a transaction. That mattered more than pretending everything was fine just because we shared the same last name. People talk about revenge like it has to be loud. Like healing only counts if someone else loses. But honestly, the strongest thing I ever did was stop begging for respect from people determined not to give it. Some people would probably call that revenge. I call it boundaries. If you have ever had to choose between protecting your peace and keeping everyone else comfortable, then you probably understand exactly what I mean. And if this story connected with you, I would genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Your experiences matter too. And if you enjoy honest stories about family, resilience, and learning how to reclaim your self-respect, make sure you subscribe because there are many more stories still to come.